A woman wakes to hear a loud surge of water crashing through her neighborhood. Screaming follows. A young boy calls frantically for his sister. There's no reply. Around 2100 BC in the Xia dynasty, a great earthquake shook Qinghai on the Tibetan plateau. Rocks spilled over, blocking the first bend in the Yellow River. Water collected in this natural dam, and this happened at a time of global warming. Himalayan meltwater rushed down the tributaries. The pressure increased until all at once it burst, surging downstream, carving away everything in its path. 4,000 years later, in 2001, archaeologists excavate a city that was buried. A family's bones lie in a circle around a central fireplace. That's where the mud and water swirled through like wet concrete, burying them where they sat. Through archaeology, folk tales, songs, and historic writings, we can get a picture of what happened next. Within hours, a mustiness hung in the air. Stored food grew spots. The village woman's daughter fell ill. The combination of stress and fatigue overwhelmed them. Lethargy was followed by rage and then exhaustion. Domestic violence increased, and people could be heard screaming at each other. At night, people had terrifying dreams. Pretty soon, the nightmares started to spill into the daylight, and the fungal neurotoxins spread throughout their bodies. The children started to see ghosts first, then the adults. A feeling of dread and anxiety spread throughout the community. Some tried to sleep the sickness off, while others fell asleep and never woke again. King Yu would have seen the damage from over Xinjiao city walls. It was 1 million square meters, including layers of defense works, an impressive city wall 7 kilometers in length, as well as inner and outer moats. Some of the largest buildings anyone had seen were in the city, and yet as he watched the rising river, he knew that it would be choked with deadly mud if he didn't act soon. Memories of his father must have haunted him. His father, King Gwen, had tried to control the river by adding more soil. He piled up levees, but the river rose. He used earth to control water. He organized work crews to add more rock and clay, yet the river rose. Eventually it spilled over and destroyed the villages. He was completely disgraced, and the lives lost were on his head. He was forced into exile, where he committed suicide in shame. King Yu drank from his cup, made from a futuristic cutting-edge alloy called bronze. He stood on a floor inlaid with a jade dragon. He ruled over one of the most powerful and prosperous cities on earth. Yet he was completely vulnerable to the devastation caused by climate change. He knew what his fate would be if he failed to provide the right answers. Archaeologists found the remains of priests and kings of the early Yellow River civilizations who had failed to control the river. Most were found to have been tortured before being unceremoniously tossed into a moat. Everything rested in the people's faith in his ability to predict the future and lead them to success. By his word they planted and harvested. His class of priests and kings kept the records of the sun and moon. They recorded the cycles to predict the weather and seasonal flooding. Those who were granted insider information would have had thriving farms, while those who didn't could be plagued with withering crops and insects. This became the mandate of heaven. They were speaking for the heavens because they had learned to track time. The key to his power was having precision others could not achieve. Still, it was a bit shaky. Yes, they could predict the equinox and changes in planetary alignments, but this didn't exactly extend to controlling the environment. It merely helped them adapt to predictable changes, provided that what happened last year would also happen this year. This was a nuance that citizens couldn't understand. For them, he was either a god king with the mandate of heaven or an impostor. Political rivals would have been quick to spread rumors to damage his credibility. and they would claim to have heaven's favor themselves to give themselves a chance to rise. King Yu would have gone to the royal observatory on the mountain to the east of the city. Recently excavated, the large stones give us a look into that time. Rays of light spill through the tall stone columns onto the polished floor, marking the changes in the time, date, and seasonal cycles. Without specialized education, it would have been very difficult to interpret. King Yu had to convince the citizens that his scientists understood climate change and how to solve it, so they could maintain organization instead of descending into homicidal chaos. He organized work crews to save some of the fields, yet as the people started working, a lethargy swept over them. Their backs ached and they felt chilled. Before long, some were passing out in the fields. The usual medicines for contagious diseases were barely helping, and in some cases were even making them worse. He asked his research panel. They suspected that there was some type of tiny water bugs or perhaps an evil mold. Either way, the dampness was the problem. They considered it for a while and answered, if the evil of dampness was rotting them, then they would need to find a pungent plant to kill the disease. The evil was coming from upriver, so the most likely plants which can kill this pathogen might be found there as well. They traveled for weeks upriver to the dark cloud forests at the foothills of the Himalayas. Men who slept on simple straw mats would sometimes wake up paralyzed from the dampness. This was similar to what the people in the villages along the Yellow River were experiencing, so he knew that he must be getting close. If the paralyzing damp evil was strong there, then plant life must have found a way to adapt. As they searched, his men developed sinus infections and digestive distress. As they walked into the hills, some of them could feel their hands getting mysteriously swollen and their joints ached. King Yu's legs became stiff and weak as he walked as though he was an old man. They ended up in a mountain village and saw that there were local people who were healthy and beautiful in spite of this very damp environment. The mountain people had clearly learned to adapt to the moldy landscape. Was it due to their breeding, or did they know a secret using incantations? Did they have a special herb? King Yu's life and society depended on him finding the answer. The situation was dire and pressing, but at the same time he knew that there was no time to make assumptions. He wanted to make sure that he wasn't missing anything. To investigate it further, he stayed in a local farmer's house to live with them and learn about their customs. He found that the hostess, Jiao Hua, cooked delicious foods such as he had never experienced with an incredible flavor. It not only caused tingling and numbness, but it caused his body to physically vibrate and warm up. This helped kill the pain and get him walking again like a normal person. He saw some unknown red fruits in the rice and asked what it was. Jiao Hua told Yu the Great that it's a mountain fruit that can help cultivate digestion, drain away the dampness, stop pain, and strengthen the muscles, and it was responsible for giving the local people's skin a healthy, beautiful glow. After a few days of eating this spice, he and his men could feel the effects and made arrangements to pick a lot of this spice and bring it back. The village woman looked out to hear soldiers coming. They had carts filled with bags of Sichuan peppercorn. They distributed them, asking people to cook them and make them into herbal steams, into teas, and to use them as herbal baths and foot soaks. As she approached the open bags, the pungent scent lifted up into her sinuses and seemed to wake her from a dream. She watched herself filling the ceramic pot and adding Sichuan peppercorns and placing it over the fire. As she started cooking it, she was no longer watching herself do things, but she felt like she was coming back into her body. It was as if the Sichuan peppercorn was pushing the evil away from her home. The fragrance replaced the evil mustiness in the air. Her husband drank a bowl of the Sichuan peppercorn tea and he slept for 2 hours. When he woke up, he felt like doing some things around the house and was coming back to his old self. Her daughter's nose cleared, and everyone in the family started to feel relieved. As the community recovered over the next few weeks, they used their energy to band around King Yu to terraform the land, creating canals to drain away the excess water. Whether myth or history, the story of King Yu became an important lesson for agriculture and medicine. What we know for sure is that Sichuan peppercorns were highly esteemed by early Chinese kings. The ancient state of Chu, 1115 to 223 BC, was found to have Sichuan peppercorn wine buried with the royalty, and they suspect that it was used for health, libido, and to chase away evil spirits. And one of the reasons they think that it was used for libido and fertility is that the rooms for the queens and concubines were made out of a combination of Sichuan peppercorns, mud, and paint. So they made frescoes out of the Sichuan peppercorn, which is kind of one of the world's first mold-resistant paints. Now, why is this a big deal for fertility? In Sichuan, one of the main causes of infertility among fertility doctors I've studied under is mold, which engages in molecular mimicry and can really harm the hormones in the body. So by using Sichuan peppercorns this way, they were able to remove the mold toxicity and help preserve fertility. At this time, around 25% of ancient food recipes use Sichuan peppercorn. In the Ming Dynasty, the imperial family alone used 4,000 kilograms of it per year. They sourced it in a place that's still known to have the best quality to this day. And this place is high in the Tibetan Plateau. And this is where we source our Sichuan peppercorns as well. And today it's used by government elites, it's used in gourmet restaurants, and it's used for medical purposes. We pre-order it before the harvest is done. And this way we can get the absolute best of the best and have it immediately vacuum sealed and then sent out so that it's really picked at its peak time. And its peak time is really fascinating because it's picked in the middle of August when Sichuan is completely damp and hot and it's just fungal. There's mold everywhere. So this is a time when the Sichuan peppercorns are really pumping out their volatile oils. So it's at this peak time of dampness that the Sichuan peppercorns are carefully picked and preserved. The way of picking them, there's a complete art in this. We could literally talk for hours just about the process of harvesting Sichuan peppercorns because there's an art to it that's passed down within families. You can't just pick it, you can't shake it loose, you have to pluck it using very delicate touch because if you break the outer kernel, it will already change the flavor profile. During late summer is really the time to get your orders in. You can reserve your supply from a botanical biohacking healthcare practitioner. The way you typically use the really good quality Sichuan peppercorn is you take just a little bit. If you're using high quality, you don't need a lot, maybe 4 to 5 kernels, even 3 sometimes. And you just start to cook it in the oil before you cook vegetables or meat. Maybe you'll add some ginger if it's meat, or you add some chopped up garlic if it's a vegetable. You add just a little bit of the Sichuan peppercorns and fry the vegetables with it. It gives an incredible flavor. It's both numbing and tingling, and because of the way it works on the potassium channels, it is nature's painkiller. And it does this through the potassium channels, but also it causes a physical vibration. And when they test the vibration, it is working at about 50 hertz. So it's kind of giving your body a whole body massage, and the act of vibration has secondary effects on cultivating your gut microbiome. So this is why this herb has been thought to, chase away evil. It kills mold. It helps to cultivate the internal microbiome. So you definitely don't need every herb on the planet. I never suggest that. But as a simple culinary herb which can massively increase your quality of life, 2 things I couldn't live without. One, Sichuan peppercorns. The other is good tea. And for us, both of those are sourced, absolute premium grade, and then tested at pharmaceutical standard. Thanks so much for listening to the Botanical Biohacking Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Andrew Miles.